measuring the effectiveness of risk minimization measures, so studies that are conducted after the authorization. And we are talking of studies that are called post-authorization safety studies. Now, there is a legal definition of post-authorization safety studies in the legislation, but the concept is that we define as past post-authorization safety studies all those studies that help us to understand the knowledge on the safety profile of a medicinal product, or help us to understand whether or not interventions have been effective. Okay, so this is the general concept. So in more granular, a more granular level, what that means, a post-authorization safety study, so a study that is conducted once the product is on the market, will help to quantify and known risk or to identify new risks. And I think we all have to live with the concept that those risks cannot be all identified before the authorization, and we need to conduct the study in the post-authorization phase. We can use this study also to study those populations that were not included in the clinical trials program, and Stella gave already an overview of the usual suspect, the people that are systematically excluded from those studies, and probably quite rightly so if the purpose is to measure the effectiveness, efficacy of a product, but then routine clinical practice is a different matter, so we need to consider also the real target population in clinical practice. And now the drug works in that population. It's important to conduct this sort of studies also in order to confirm the absence of a risk. Whenever there is a signal, a safety signal, we really hope that that's not a real safety concern. And in order to establish that, we may need to conduct a study to clear our mind. And it's important to conduct studies in order to study and evaluate how the drug is actually used in routine practice. So if there is a lot of compliance with the instructions in the label, or if all the information that is produced is not put into practice at any level. And as we have talked before, we need to conduct these studies to measure the effectiveness of risk minimization measures or activity. Okay, so these studies can be started, managed, or just sponsored by the marketing authorization holder of a medicinal product. And the new legislation provides the regulator with the tool to impose the conduct of this study. So the conduct of that study becomes one of the conditions of the marketing authorization. This has quite a weight, let's say, from the enforceability point of view, or can be conducted just because the study has been, the product has been granted authorization under exceptional circumstances, and you touched upon that before. But the study imposed by the regulators, but also study conducted voluntarily by the marketing authorization holder. So those studies that are described in the risk management plan that Stella talked about earlier, that are planned by the marketing authorization holder, who are aware of the safety issue and are proposing to investigate the safety concern further, or they are proposing to investigate the effectiveness of a proposed risk minimization activity. Whether in pursuit of an obligation or started voluntarily, what we want to ensure is that the level of scientific soundness, if you wish, of these studies is the same. And this table is quite busy, but the concept I want to flag out is that, as I said, whether imposed or just conducted voluntarily, we have a set of legal obligations, procedures, and measures put in place whereby the study conducted in a post-authorization setting are optimized in terms of scientific standard and quality of data. You don't need to go into the details here. One other thing I want on these slides, but one thing I want to flag out is that we are talking here about non-interventional post-authorization safety study. Non-interventional studies are very different from randomized controlled trials. They follow different legislation, and that's the legislation we are referring to, okay? And the obligations and procedures and recommendation in place relate to the study protocol, but also relate to the way either imposed or conducted voluntarily studies are subject to in terms of reporting the study results to the authority, but also making the study results available in the scientific literature for scrutiny. And the legislation provide quite stringent guidance on the format and content of the protocol of non-interventional paths. And there are different objectives. Well, the scientific soundness is the overarching one, but we want to make sure that all the studies are conducted according to the same standard, also in terms of administrative information and all the aspects of the protocol. And there is reference to some resources for further information on the technicality of the past protocol. Now, one element introduced by the legislation is the requirement for providing the public with a site where all these post-authorization study are recorded. And this, the EU pass is not a typo, it's deliberately a post-authorization study, so we don't limit this register only to safety study, but to all study conducted post-authorization. And the purpose is transparency, exchange of information, peer review. The more people have access to this information, the more we improve knowledge and quality of the outcome of this study. This registry will also support the EMA in the responsibility of making the PASS protocol and study results available to the public, will support exchange of information across the 27 member states and of the European Union. It will represent in general a repository of all non-interventional post-authorization studies that are conducted in Europe, irrespective of the sponsor, investigators, whether or not the public or private initiators are involved. The registration in this in the EU pass will not replace the regulatory submission, so there will be still regulatory procedure in place to assess the studies and evaluate the results of these studies. And other details you are not particularly interested in. I just want to mention that one site, one depository of studies is already alive and is managed by the agency in the context of the European Networks of Center of Pharmacovigilance and Pharmacoepidemiology. Is a network, the title is self-explanatory, a network of Center of Excellence in this topic. And among other activity, there is already the registry which is active there, which allow voluntarily principal investigator and sponsor to register their study there. Now the concept is that in order to implement the requirement of the new legislation, this registry, the NCEP registry, existing NCEP registry, will be upgraded to meet all the requirements of the EU PASS register. So we don't need to start from scratch. There will be a transitional period with some arrangement which are described in these slides, but the details I don't think are particularly relevant to you. But the good side of the story is that with an upgrade rather than starting from scratch, we are much closer to target than what we could expect otherwise. And I think I'll stop here and be happy to give you more time for questions.
Maybe we can try to take, thank you very much, a couple of questions on Jane George.
I just have a question about post-authorization safety studies. And in a recent book by Ben Goldacre, and it has received a lot of attention here in the UK, in the media, and the book was called Bad Pharma. And one of the criticisms of Ben Goldacre was that a lot of these post-authorization studies, especially those that were an obligation for the market authorization holder, were never conducted or were not reported on, and even worse, even when they weren't conducted and not reported, there were no sanctions that were imposed on the market authorization holder. And I'm just wondering whether you had a comment on that, and second, if this new system will improve the system so that that won't happen in the future.
No working. Okay. On and off. Yes, the idea is that all the registration in a registry will facilitate public scrutiny, first of all. Then, if the study is introduced as a condition of the market authorization, is a legal obligation, and the enforceability from the legal standpoint is much stronger. Anyway, all the studies included in the risk management plan are legally enforceable, and therefore, we have the legal tools to, follow more closely, let's say, on the actual conduct of these studies. That's the scenario. So several at different level intervention aiming at a better compliance with those obligations, basically.
Just to say that before all this, most of the what we used to call follow-up measures, they didn't have a legal obligation. There was not a legal binding obligation from the company to follow it. So it was, I think we have to say that this is an issue that was very much identified, was very frustrating and disappointing for us, and hopefully now it will change dramatically. Yeah. Richie?
Such a pass, is it, if that's a condition for marketing authorization, is it then always in the approved indication, or can it also observe, for instance, off-label use?
Let's try again, yeah. A bit of a tricky point. I think the definition of non-interventional post-authorization safety study as it stands does not include studies that evaluate use, let's say, in off-label. The randomized clinical trial directive is under review, and there is a very strong hope from the pharmacoepidemiology community that this can be addressed in that context. I hear voices that maybe that hope is not very well posed. I'm looking at Stella, but at the moment it is a problem because the way the study is described in the legislation poses some limitations to the actual conduct of the study off-label. That's what I can say.
Albert?
Yeah, but is there not a big problem then? For who's the market authorization when there is off-label use? So how can you impose something on a market authorization for he's not a market authorization holder for the off-label use?
Well, in a way, there is a change in the legislation in the sense that any use of the medicine, even out of the indication, it has to be reported and it's going to be assessed by the PRAC. So in that sense, it opens a little bit the door for further possibilities.
Yeah. So I could see a recommendation for further studies, because why should it be the market authorization holder? Why should it not be the scientific organization that should do the study, if there's a reason for it? To be more explicit, I see a problem there, for it will be a very big burden for market authorization holder. And I'm not pleading for them, but for patients, access to medicines and availability of medicines is important, of course. And the more you heighten the burden, and for this is not yes, they have no say.
But that really depends as well on what we are talking, because if we are talking about efficacy, for sure, but if we are talking about safety, then it's a different, I think there is a different connotation here.
If there is a safety issue related to a given product, I think it is expected that the market authorization holder takes responsibility to address that safety issue. Whether then there will be a consortium of independent third parties conducting the study or not, that can be also considered. It can be a possible scenario, but that doesn't, unfortunately, preclude or remove the problem of how the study is designed to address the problem of definition of observational or interventional. It is a major issue, unfortunately.
So Estela will give the last comment.
As I said, there's all study affects several products. And there's a thing that says the EMA shall encourage, and it doesn't quite say how we can encourage. I have bullwhips in mind. The companies to do joint studies. There's also funding from the European Commission on various, tending to be particularly on products that are out of, issues that are outside of the patents, or products that are old products. So the Commission funds some studies on that. And at the EMA, we have a minute pot of money that enables us to do some studies when we have issues like that, as Annalisa was saying.